I'm Marcia Mertens, and I'm a family physician. I've been a family physician for over 33 years, and I did my undergraduate training at William Jewell College in Liberty, Missouri, a small liberal arts college. Okay, sorry. Okay. And then I went to medical school at the University of Missouri Columbia School of Medicine. I did a 3-year residency in family medicine at the old St. John's Mercy Medical Center in St. Louis, Missouri. And for over 30 years, I taught medical students and residents, and now I'm in a practice with Mercy down in Hillsborough, Missouri also. So that's my background. And when I was in college and through medical school, as I learned more and more about science and especially about the human body, my faith became stronger and stronger and stronger that God is real and that He's out there and that He's really quite amazing when you look at what He's done with the human body. So that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. So if you look at just organ systems like our special senses, our circulatory system, our respiratory system, our gastrointestinal system, you look at that fairly superficially, it's pretty complex how it all works. And then if you get down to looking at our tissues and how the tissues work, that's even more amazing. And then when you get down to the cells and how the cells work, that's even more amazing. So we're going to talk a little bit about those different levels. And scientists and physicians can really spend their whole careers learning about science, learning about medicine, learning about the human body, and still only touch on the surface because there's so much to know. And as science changes, there's even more to know. You know, when I got out of medical school in 1982, medicine knew about this much, and now, 35 years later, medicine knows a whole lot more. And that's still only a little bit of what there is to know about the human body. So if you look at some of the advances we've made in medicine, and you look at what man can do to help his fellow man as far as helping the human body, there's things we can do like try to replace joints. Joints seem like they're pretty simple, but even with all the technological advances that we've had over so many years, artificial joint, if you're lucky, might last a person 15 years, where the joints that God gave us, they last, for most people, their entire lifetime. I think that's pretty amazing. And there's a lot of joints in the body that man can't replace. They're just not very feasible. You look at things like an artificial finger joint. Our fingers are quite amazing. Our shoulders, because of their location and how they work. Our ankles. You look at prosthetic limbs for someone who's lost an arm or a hand. Even though they're getting better all the time, they're only recently coming up with ways for a person to maybe be able to feel a little bit with an artificial hand. And it sounds like a simple thing, but if you think about how you button your shirt every day, if you put on a shirt with buttons, if you cannot feel the fabric and you cannot feel the buttons, you would have to look at every single one to be able to get it buttoned, where you don't even think about it. You just button it right down because you feel everything. Go ahead. What can't man replace? You look at the human eye. So small, but so intricate. Dave touched on this a little bit, but you look at the simplest part of the eye, which is probably the cornea, the clear part that covers your pupil. Even that, man cannot replace very well. They've come up with artificial corneas, but they're only a last resort for someone whose body will reject a cornea transplant from someone who's died. Our lenses in our own eyes, our own natural lenses, they can change shape constantly. When we look at things, we look at something far away, we look at something near. Our eye accommodates to that. It focuses. When somebody has a cataract and their lens gets clouded and they get an artificial lens, that lens has a lot more limitations of what it can do. And then you get to the really complex part where you have the rods and the cones on the back of the retina, and those turn into the optic nerve, and that goes to your brain. Go ahead, next slide. This shows a little bit of that. The lens is in the front. The cornea is in the front. The lens is the white behind it, and the retina going into the optic nerve. Go ahead, Bill. So computers have been trained to recognize images, so it's one form of artificial intelligence, but their ability to recognize images is pretty limited. If you change something as simple as the lighting, the angle that it looks at it, how fine the picture is, what the resolution is, the accuracy of those computers, those artificial intelligence, to recognize an image is very, very limited. It's not as good as a person. Go ahead. So animals can see things too, but man can not only see things, but man can read words and symbols, and those words and symbols don't just mean something concrete, but they mean things like feelings and emotions, and it affects us. And I think that's pretty special. So, go ahead. So if you look at brains versus artificial intelligence, and you look at a little toddler, their brain is just barely starting, it's learning. Their brain is so powerful. Their brain they can see things, they can make noises, they can hear things, they can learn, they can talk, they can walk. They can do an amazing amount of things with that little brain that's just starting. And then you look at the other end of the spectrum. My 84-year-old my mother, we go to visit her. She's always on her little iPad playing Scrabble online, and she can beat the computer on a regular basis playing Scrabble. You know, and here she is, her brain is 84 years old. It's been aging, it's been deteriorating, but she's still amazing. That's from God. And you look at these machines, this artificial intelligence, and they've only been able to do, they're trained for certain, they're built, they're designed for certain tasks, and that's all they can do. One might be able to do this, and one might be able to do this, but they can't do that multitude of things that our human brain can do. So how about our lungs? Our lungs are really amazing again. Our lungs can exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide much more efficiently than anything that's out there. So there's this doctor who's developing kind of a portable artificial lung for people who need one. And they're testing it in sheep. But it's gigantic, it's heavy, and it still requires oxygen. They can't just breathe the air. They have to have pure oxygen going into that artificial lung for it to work. And this is why a lung transplant is really the only good option for somebody whose lungs fail them completely. It's not perfect, but it's better than an artificial lung. Go ahead. So artificial hearts are similar. They've been researched for decades, and we've had over 50 years of scientists trying to come up with a really good artificial heart, because once your heart gives out, you either get a heart transplant or you're going to die. But the human heart is really irreplaceable. The total artificial heart, the best one that they have out there right now, it's only considered a very temporary measure. If somebody's heart goes out completely and they're waiting for a heart transplant and they can't get one, then they might use this total artificial heart for a little while. And that's because it has a high rate of complications. It's not as good as our heart. So this next picture will show you a little bit why. The human heart is on the right, and I think when I was younger and I learned about the heart, I thought, yeah, that's pretty cool, have these valves and these chambers, and the blood goes in, the blood goes out. But when you really look at it, it's even more amazing than that, because it's got its own little built-in electrical system. It's got its own little built-in pacemaker. That is controlled by the involuntary part of our brain, makes the heart beat in a synchronized fashion. The blood goes through the chambers, goes through the lungs, goes out to the body. We have arteries on the muscle that are feeding the muscle, bringing it nutrients, oxygen, making it contract, keep beating, keep us alive. It's small. It works great. You look at the total artificial heart, it's pretty bulky. It has to be implanted in the person, and they have to have tubes running out of their body to go to this backpack size thing that runs their artificial heart, and then that has to be charged on a regular basis. So, and it's not even very good, so it has lots of complications. Go ahead. How about our kidneys? Some of you know somebody who's had dialysis, had to be on dialysis, had a transplant. Dialysis is a burden to people. They have to be hooked up to a machine for 3 or 4 hours, 3 days a week. They can't go out of town, go on vacation without making arrangements because their blood has to be filtered, keep everything in line so that they don't die. And some people will have peritoneal dialysis, which you can do at home. Requires huge amounts of fluid, requires being hooked up to the machine. If you go somewhere, you have to take all that stuff with you. And even with dialysis, it doesn't keep a person's blood perfect like our kidneys do. It gets it to where it's tolerable so they can stay alive, but a lot of things are not right. Go ahead. If you look at the reserve in our organs, it's pretty amazing too. So many times organs get damaged by disease or sometimes by things that we do like smoking or drinking too much, heart attacks. And you look at those organs, a heart attack victim, their heart may be damaged quite massively by a heart attack, but with the right medicines and with time and with God, their hearts can heal. Sometimes hearts will go from being very damaged, very poor functioning pumps, and they may recover completely. I think that's pretty amazing. You look at people who have COPD and emphysema, many of those people, even though their lungs are heavily damaged, they still may be able to walk around and function and do things better than somebody could with one of these artificial lungs. Go back. Chronic kidney disease, many people live for years with significant impairment of their kidneys, but they are still able to function. And people who've had strokes, they may have complete paralysis on one side of their body, and yet their brain eventually repairs, compensates, and sometimes you see people make a complete recovery where they can walk and talk again and they weren't able to. Go ahead. One more thing about organ transplants. If someone does have an organ transplant, they have to be on anti-rejection drugs, and those are very potent drugs. They make a person very susceptible to serious infections because their immune system is dampened down so much. And did you realize that when a woman is pregnant, the baby that's in her, half of the proteins and antigens in that baby are foreign to that mother. They come from the father, and yet her body does not reject that baby. I think that's pretty miraculous. That baby stays and thrives in the mother even though it's foreign tissue. I think science needs to learn something about that when it comes to organ transplants to make organ transplants more successful. Now I'm going to get down on the smaller level. We're going to go down to cells and the subcellular level. So the picture on the left is just a general schematic of a human or an animal cell. It has a lot of things inside of it. And then the one on the right is DNA. And it's got a very complex structure. And if you look at our bodies, they're made up of about 37.2 trillion cells. Lots and lots of cells in our bodies. And then each cell has somewhere between 100 and 1,000 copies of DNA in it. Go ahead. This is a really great website that Bill showed me. It's called Reasonsorg. And there's a lot of different scientists that have blogs on there, and they write a lot of very complex stuff. Even as a scientist and person who studied a lot of chemistry and biochemistry and all that stuff, some of this stuff goes way over my head. But there's stuff on there that you would understand and you would really appreciate. But he talks about how when he was a graduate student studying biochemistry, it made him really want to become a Christian because he realized how complex everything is and how it's not an accident. Animals, humans, none of that stuff happened by accident. It was designed. Go ahead. And he talks about how he left a Fortune 500 company because he wanted to join this Reasons to Believe, which their website is now called Reasons.org, because he thought it was the most important thing he could do to communicate to people how science, there's very powerful scientific evidence being uncovered every day for God's existence and how reliable Scripture is. Go ahead. So he talks about how scientists have now determined that they can use those tiny little DNA particles that we have 100 or 1,000 copies of in our cells, and they can use those now as a wire because they can conduct electrical current at very, very, very fast speeds. So they're looking at using DNA inside of medical devices and inside of tiny little devices. I think that's astounding. But, he said, again, considering the wire properties of DNA, it is not madness to think that a creator exists and played a role in life's genesis. Go ahead. So this is, again, a picture of DNA. And now the other thing he talks about on his blog is how it's being used as a storage tool, which I found very, very fascinating. Go ahead. If you think about it, at the moment of conception, the tiny chromosomes that are found in that one cell that is formed has enough information to form an entire human body with all those complexities we're talking about. That's a lot of data in that DNA. And what's even more amazing is that single cell that starts, it differentiates into nerve cells, muscle cells, lung cells, skin cells. How does that happen? I mean, it's something. Go ahead. And he talks about how we know so much data can be stored on DNA that they started looking at using it to store other data. And he talks about how there's probably, this figure might even be old because I'm sure it goes up every single day, but at the time he wrote this, 44 trillion gigabytes of data in the world. Tons and tons of data. It takes a lot to store all that data. Go ahead, Bill. And compounding the problem is the current ways that we have of storing data, it degrades, it breaks down. So magnetic disks, tapes, all that stuff, it breaks down. Go ahead. But because DNA is so good at storing data, it's been looked at as basically the next great thing to store data because it is digitized. The data that's on DNA is digitized. And they've encoded entire computer programs, operating systems, movies, all kinds of things on tiny little pieces of DNA. Go ahead. They determined that about a half pound of DNA could probably store all of the data in the world. All of the data in the world. Go ahead. This is a little picture I found on the web. This is actually from a hacker magazine, and it's saying basically the same thing. That's the new digital storage. Go ahead. So conclusions for me, I think if you just look at the human body and the science of the human body, it's very convincing that we are not an accident, that we didn't just kind of evolve, we didn't come from nowhere, that there was a all-knowing creator who's very powerful, highly intelligent, who created us as complex beings. And as I work as a physician day to day and I see how the human body works, and again, things like amazing reparations of injuries, I'm just convinced every day that God's out there and He knows what He's doing. So, any questions?
I got a question.
Uh-huh.
Did you happen to read anything about whether DNA can exist outside of the human body? I mean, how would they use that to store data and have something that's transportable and storable?
You know, I didn't read the details on that. I can't really tell you. Okay. Yeah. But I would think, in my mind, when I did think about it a little bit, but I didn't actually have time to look it up and figure it out. But, you know, there's DNA and plasmids and microorganisms. That's my guess on how they can do it, is just have DNA from microorganisms actually store some of this stuff.